Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. This is really, really exciting for me. I'm going to tell you that personally this has been a really exciting project for me. I'm sure, like most of you, in the wake of everything that we see happening, you sort of feel a sense of bewilderment and a sense of helplessness. In the wake of things like a broad immigration ban, sanctioning of misogynistic, racist, heterophobic and transphobic attitudes, we see, along with that, and anti-intellectualism and policy that seems to be driven without any science involved in the decision making. We've got censoring of the EPA, federal hiring freezes, and then we've got new proposed budgets with radical cuts to NIH funding. And what I've been feeling is a sense of, oh my God, what can I possibly do as one person? So for me, it's really exciting that I created something that brought all of you here. What I did was reach out to my contacts, talk to a lot of people, got an immense amount of support from people in the graduate division, from the science policy, our Vice Chancellor for Science Policy, the Science Policy Group, and all sorts of people across campus to create an entire series around science and advocating for science and scientists. So this is just the first in our series of events, Advocacy 101. The goal is to support UCSF researchers who want to step into the world of advocacy and don't know how. We want to create a broader and better understanding of the biomedical research enterprise. And each of our series, each of the events in our series is going to involve a specific topic. We want each of those to involve a set of things that you can take away and actionable items that you can do as we leave the room. We've already said a few of our upcoming events, so I'm going to talk about those at the end. Some of you have received a card that's got the website, so you can always log onto the website to see what we've got planned. So today at Advocacy 101, we're going to focus on two key areas. First, we want to provide a glimpse of what it looks like when scientists talk to politicians. What does it look like to advocate in your governments? Second, we want to share more about what's happening on April 22nd, which is the March for Science. This is the global March for Science. We're going to be mobilizing scientists both in DC and in San Francisco, so regardless of where you're going to be on April 22nd, we hope we can provide you with some tools of what you can do to get involved on that day. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who really needs no introduction at UCSF. Keith Yamamoto, our Vice Dean for Research in the School of Medicine, Professor of Cellular and Molecular Pharmacology, and of course UCSF's first ever Vice Chancellor for Science Policy. Keith has told this story many times. He's got a long history of advocacy. He's now afraid of what I'm going to say. But it's okay. I'm just going to point out that his history of advocacy began way back in his grad school days when he took a leave of absence to campaign for George McGovern. So he's been doing this a while. These days he's, as many of you know, one of the country's leading biomedical policymakers and advocates. So Keith.
Great. Thank you, Liz, for putting this whole thing together. It's fantastic. You all know how well the McGovern campaign worked out, so you shouldn't really listen to me. You know, one thing that Liz left out of this incredible string of adjectives that she gave to our current situation is that there are those who say that scientists shouldn't get involved in policy matters, that they shouldn't be doing things that are political. There's confusion about where the laws lie with 501c3 entities that are supposed to not be taking political stances. And I think that all of this will come up. I know that Claire is going to discuss that. I'm sure that some people in the room have this maybe even paramount in their minds, and we should definitely discuss it. But let me get my stake in the ground right away and say that those of us and everyone in the room qualifies here who are involved in doing federally funded research, biomedical research, health and prevention research, actually health care, are beneficiaries of a great public trust. and that is the federal dollars that are allocated to support our work. It's 0.8% of the budget, for those of you who want to run the numbers. It's about $100 per resident of this country. With that trust, I think, comes 3 levels of responsibility. One is that I think we owe a debt of appreciation to the taxpayers of this country who are providing that level of support. We are concerned, we fret about the $32 billion as being not enough, and it is not enough, but it's a lot more than the violinists and poets are getting, and I think that we should recognize that. Secondly, I think we have a responsibility to communicate with the public and with policymakers about what it is that we do, what drives us to do it, what the impact and outcomes are of our doing it, why it's important, and why, and here's the advocacy part, why we need more. And I think all of those actually fall into what I would consider responsibility. And then finally, I think that we need to commit in a very explicit way to engage in conversations with policymakers about our discoveries, our technologies, and the ways that they will be used, and that we will do everything we can to assure that those discoveries and technologies will be used for the betterment of all people. You all know that knowledge and technology is valueless. It doesn't have a positive or a negative value to it. It's how you use it, and how those things get used are going to be decisions of all of the people, or of our representatives, and really only scientists who are involved in creating these things can really create a platform for making wise decisions along those lines, and so we have that responsibility too. Now, with those responsibilities, I have to say that we're also incredibly lucky. We're lucky because the citizens of this country like you. They like scientists. Scientists rank 3rd, I think it is, in the latest polls that I've seen, in respect afforded to various professions. And amazingly enough, they like research. And so I'm on the board of directors of Research America, an organization some of you have undoubtedly heard of. And they've run polls in this country for the last 27 years. And among the things that they survey is what people's sense is of whether they support research. Support it meaning they want their tax dollars to be spent to support it. And all 27 years, the positive numbers have come out in the 80s. So that will probably surprise some people, given what kinds of things that we see in the papers every morning now. But it is still the case that there's a lot of support. So we start from a good place. We don't have to climb uphill, so that's fortunate. However, it's also clear from those surveys that people don't actually understand science. They don't understand what it is that we do, or why we do it, or what leads us from one place to another in the ways that we pursue a scientific investigation. They don't really understand scientific evidence-based reasoning in detail. They don't know what it is that we're accomplishing. They have little or no understanding of why basic science is important, just curiosity-driven pursuits that scientists dream up, why that connects to anything that makes a difference. They certainly don't understand why we're now in this wonderful place to be able to essentially merge the scientific disciplines and bring various kinds of investigations together, or why big data is important. They don't get that. So we've got a lot of work to do. And they certainly don't understand in that context why more money would make a difference. And so that's what it is that we've got cut out for us. And it's in large measure what Advocacy 101 is all about, because it's really only scientists who can convey that information appropriately and accurately. And to my mind, is the most direct answer to those among us who say that scientists shouldn't get involved in these things. They should steer clear of these issues that have this kind of political overtone to it. And that brings me to my last point, and that is that we're now in an incredibly different world than we were before November 8th. We enjoyed, probably didn't appreciate, the fact that the previous administration was the most science-friendly, supportive, dependent, certainly in the time that I've been in doing this business. And so we were all happy to complain about the things that they didn't get done. But I think we didn't notice that the Office of Science and Technology Policy was generating these incredible presidential initiatives right and left that were science-based, the kinds of honors that the president afforded to scientists year after year. And then suddenly, we're now in a situation where science is not just being ignored, but it's being actively denigrated and very clearly politicized in ways I think nobody in the room expected. That's okay, Bruce, that's okay. It's just exactly what I needed heckling from my thesis advisor. Yeah, I know. It's fine. He let me work in the McGovern campaign. I think that was... I think he might have been just trying to get rid of me. None of us expected the situation that we're in, that Liz described, and you're all incredibly aware of. None of us is able to avert our eyes every morning from the New York Times, even though we're consistently horrified with what we see there. In fact, I hope you all read the editorial this morning from the New York Times. Very important, of Trump's war against science. And I think that it's really critical that scientists cannot remain silent in the face of this. We don't want to wake up 10 years from now in a very, very bad situation and think back and think, oh, gee, maybe we should have said something back then. So for all of the concerns that you may have or questions that you may have explicitly about what we as people within the University of California system can and should be talking about, and I know that's going to be directly addressed. I think the overriding thing in my mind is that we cannot stay silent. It's really very important for us to speak up. So, Advocacy 101, I think the answer is we must advocate. We must be in there talking about our work, educating and informing the public and our policymakers, and that we must actively promote policies that will advance science and research. We must actively talk about policy decision-making across our society that is based on evidence that respects truth and facts. And that if scientists can't stand up and do that, we're in big trouble. So I think this is a chance to really get a stake in the ground on that business. So let's get going with the program and have some fun.
Great. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to ask Natalie Alpert and Laura Lane to come up and join. And actually, Keith, if you want to have a seat and you can all answer some questions. Natalie is UCSF's Associate Director for Federal Government Relations. This is Natalie. Natalie is likely UCSF's furthest flung employee, I'm guessing, being based in D.C. That's where she is full-time. She liaises between UCSF scientists and our federal government. She has worked on the Hill for more than 10 years, and one of her most notable appointments, I noticed, was with Senator Dianne Feinstein, which is relevant for us as Californians. Laura Lane is the primary liaison for UCSF to both the state and local governments. So she's worked both in the private and public sector, and which has included some grassroots organizing, which may sound familiar to you as our past president was involved in. So we'll bring Laura and Natalie up to the front, and I believe that they have a PowerPoint that we can pull up.
All right, well, thanks for the introduction. So we're going to go back to the very basics of Advocacy 101 and kind of give you a little bit of kind of what is expected in advocacy and how to move forward. So we will start here. I'm going to actually hand that to you. Yep. So we'll start with a brief little introduction, and then we'll kind of go over kind of how to become a better advocate and what folks are looking for when you go into meetings in City Hall, in Sacramento, and on the Hill.
Yes, let's see. Should we start there? So Keith did a good job of kind of explaining why advocacy matters and why we need to be out there. But basically, we're facing, major policy changes, and our policymakers want to hear from you. They want to hear from experts. They want to hear from their constituents, and that's all of you in this room. So we're here today to try to give you some tools that you can do that.
And I mean, it's trickling down. So everything from the federal level, folks in Sacramento and folks in City Hall are concerned about what's going on and how we can come together as support for them to create policies that further the mission of UCSF: research, health, education. But there's a few ground rules, and so we'd like to ask Darnell Wright, who is Deputy Campus Counsel for UCSF, to provide just a little bit of overview on the do's and don'ts of advocacy.
Hi, everyone. Okay. I think I'm probably one of the least liked professions in that list that Keith was referring to earlier, because I often come in and say what you can't do, but I'm also going to tell you what you can do. And I'm not giving anyone legal advice in this forum. I'm just going to speak about some of the ground rules that we operate within. And if you do have some nuanced questions that you would like advice on, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is up there. So the Regents of the University of California is a 501c3 entity. That means it cannot, it has to be careful about taking political activity or political action. And anyone from the University of California community using their voice can speak individually on their own individual capacity, or they can speak on behalf of the university in very limited circumstances. So the regents will oftentimes take positions and communicate those positions out, and if the regents takes a stance, then we're welcome to communicate that stance and repeat it. If the regents hasn't taken a stance on a particular issue because it respects all the different viewpoints that are out there, and you want to say something in your individual capacity, you can do that in your individual capacity. And what that means is you shouldn't use university resources, letterhead, printing, paying for travel to political events. You can do that in your personal capacity. And if you do decide to identify yourself, you can do that and say, I work at UCSF, this is my title, but all of the statements I'm making or endorsements I'm making or positions I'm pushing for are in my individual capacity, and I can give you disclaimer language for that. Those are pretty much the ground rules. It's about private versus public action. And sometimes people say, well, why can't I say that? This is something that supports the university, and it's really important to get our opinions out there to support science and support research and support the truth. And I think sharing information is not prohibited. You can speak about science and truth and information. When you cross the lines, there are certain laws out there that prohibit us from engaging in taking a position on a ballot initiative, for example, or taking a particular party line position and saying, I am pro this party or pro that party. Those are things that would violate rules. So we ask you not to do that in the university's name. And if the Regents does come out and take a position, as it has on immigration issues, we can stand behind those public statements and let the university kind of figure out the course that it wants to take for the system. Hopefully that's helpful.
So now that we know how our voice can be heard, let's kind of walk through what Advocacy 101 looks like.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the first thing is that you want to go. So where to start is to identify your goal. What do you want to say? What do you want to convey to your member of Congress or your the member of the Board of Supervisors or whoever you're speaking to, whichever elected official you're speaking to. So you need to come up with your goal, and then then you need to kind of work on your message. You often don't have a lot of time if you're making a phone call or writing a letter or doing an in-person meeting. You don't have a lot of time to convey your message, so you want to keep it as concise and as possible, and also include as many, just distill it down, no jargon, pretend like you're talking to a family member who may not be as versed in science as you are. So that's, and then come talk to us.
Right. So we'll help you develop a short story. I mean, really, when we go into City Hall, when we go into Sacramento and the Capitol, when we go to the Hill, we're going in with short snippets of stories. And so as scientists, and you're in doing the work, and how do we take that from the bench to actually reality of like what does the average layperson understand about what you do, and how can we tell the story about why that's really important? So how do we distill kind of what you're doing into a piece of advocacy? And so one of the ways that we'll do that is we'll kind of help coach you through how to do your elevator pitch. And so, I mean, Keith has gone to D.C. quite a number of times, and Dan actually went with us, went with Natalie to D.C. and has kind of his a little short elevator pitch that he shared when he was up on the Hill.
Right. So, Keith, you want to tell us a little bit? Want to tell us a story about how you?
Sure. So I think there's an important key message here, which is to tailor your message for two ways: for your audience and for the message you want to convey. And so, yeah, I go to DC very often and pitch very different things. Let me just tell you one story that this would be a general pitch for funding for research, for scientific research. And the idea behind this pitch is to get to scale the story to one that anybody can understand. And so we can start out by making a point that the NIH is the greatest biomedical research enterprise in the world. That any kind of metric shows that, from prizes or publications, but really more importantly to real advances. It has been very often referred to in the halls of Congress and in the public domain as the crown jewel of the federal government. And that is because of the kinds of advances it makes for really what turns out to be a small amount of money. And that usually raises some eyebrows because $32 billion is not a small amount of money. So then here comes the pitch, and that is to say, when they raise their eyebrows, to say, well, okay, let me see what it means. But what I mean by that is to give you my Starbucks test, and that is to point out that over the last 40 years, the mortality rate from cardiovascular disease has dropped by 60%. That turns out to be 1 million lives a year. And so the Starbucks test is, how many Starbucks would you have to give up per year, right, in order to achieve that level of saving 1 million lives a year? How many Starbucks, $5 Starbucks per citizen per year would cover those research advances that are saving 1 million lives a year? And the answer is 1. So 1 Starbucks per year giving up. You know, just think if we gave up 2 per year, what we could achieve. So that would, if we gave up 1 per year, that would represent about a 5% increase in the budget for the NIH. And what our friend Donald Trump is proposing to do is to delete $20 per year from the NIH budget. So you can imagine what the impact of that would be on our ability to make progress across the whole spectrum of diseases. And cardiovascular disease is just one disease area. So there's a story that's compact that everybody can understand. Billions and trillions of dollars don't really mean anything to anybody. Certainly they don't mean anything to our policymakers. But if you can bring it down to a scale that everybody can understand, then you've got a chance to be able to try to have some impact. So it's one version.
That's perfect. A perfect example. That's why Keith is in D.C. every other week.
Hold on. There's a question. Yeah.
Oh, wait.
So using that example, I just want to come back to what the definition is of what's allowed and what's not. And because what you said is not allowed is lobbying, taking a specific position on a bill or measure. So if we take that example, and as long as you're saying funding is a good thing, but you stop short of saying don't vote or vote yes, that's allowable under UCSF policy?
If you are speaking, do you want to? I was going to say, if you're speaking from your a place of expertise about why funding is important, why science funding is important, then that is within your rights. You're not saying, you're not saying, in all of these meetings, Keith is speaking as, sure, he's speaking as the Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy, but he's also speaking from his position as a researcher and just speaking from his expertise, so that is allowed. Do you want to add some more to that, Darnell? Or Laura?
So I think there's a line, okay, that we're trying to draw, and I think if you're talking about information, this is information. You can share information, and you're not necessarily sharing support this candidate or that candidate. That's what we're worried about crossing over into, supporting one candidate or being anti-anything or supporting one ballot measure versus another. But language is interesting. You can say things in a particular way that can invoke those emotions, and that's why I say call me, because a certain type of communication could warrant a disclaimer. And I'm saying this on my individual behalf, not on behalf of the university. And if it doesn't warrant that, you are well within your rights to communicate. And you are still able to communicate whatever you want, regardless, as long as it doesn't say it's on behalf of the system that you're making that statement.
And frequently we'll have folks testify in City Hall, in its Capitol in Sacramento, in Washington, D.C., on behalf, as an expert, on behalf of a piece of legislation. And they're speaking from knowledge. They're obviously taking a position on a piece of legislation and persuading the legislators one way or the other, but they're not speaking on behalf of the University of California or UCSF. They're speaking as an expert in the field to, provide information and background for our legislators.
And I just want to add to that. That information doesn't have a party. I think there are folks from all parties that might feel the same way about supporting science, and I think that's the point. We're not trying to say our message is Democratic or Republican or non-party. We're saying our message is about science. It's about using facts, information, research, statistics, whatever analysis that you have come up with to make a point about a cause and effect. And I think that's what we're trying to convey.
And that can be impassioned. And it should be impassioned. I mean, what you should believe in what you're there to convey. But it comes to the line of, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the university unless the university has taken a position on a piece of legislation or on a topic.
The university always takes a position on NIH funding, though. So it is always okay to talk about NIH funding and why we should be increasing NIH funding.
I don't know if they have yet. Have they already?
The UC system put out a letter this morning on that, yeah.
So NIH funding, fair game for everyone. So with that, we'll kind of talk about some of the ways that you can get involved in advocacy.
Oh, wait a second. We didn't let Dan tell his story.
Oh,
yeah.
Dan, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm much less experienced than Keith, so I don't have so much in terms of specific numbers of funding and the impact, but for the graduate students and the postdocs out here, the actual trainees, that's the kind of perspective that I was asked to bring when I went to DC. And I went as part of the Rally for Medical Research, which is a group that has been going on for at least a few years now, to DC to advocate for cancer research, and by specifically through advancing NIH funding and using cancer as a means to motivate people. And when I went, to give an example of what we mean by short on time, I was part of a group of maybe 15 to 20-ish people in one room, and we had 30 minutes. So you really have to condense what your message is down to probably a few sentences. And when I was thinking about it, we were specifically advocating for a $2 billion increase in NIH funding. But the way that I was trying to think about it was in two means. One is, how do I translate fact into value and provide them with a story? So especially in California, who are the people we met with, the legislatures are largely on our side and really want to advocate for funding. But what really is most useful to them is getting the personal stories. They work through inductive reasoning. They take a personal story, for example, in healthcare, and say, I have a constituent that, got cancer, and all of a sudden the entire family went broke. And then they go to the larger picture, which is, and therefore you should provide funding. Whereas we usually tend to think of, here are the facts, and then here's the conclusion. They want to know specifically what is the impact already, and then how do we extrapolate backwards. So when I was talking, I do chimeric antigen receptor research in applying it to autoimmunity and type 1 diabetes. But for my intro, all I did at the beginning was say, look, we're taking an established cancer immunotherapy, something that's been very effective in particular diseases, and now we're just trying to take something that's already established and cross-apply it to a new disease. And that's pretty much all I said for that, and then they were allowed to ask follow-up questions. And the second thing I was trying to think about is, specifically for NIH funding, how does it impact students and postdocs in particular? So I thought of it as a two-pronged thing. One, NIH funding provides not just translational research funding, but also the idea of basic research, and that's very different than biotech. So a lot of people have been advocating recently, biotech can cover that. Why don't we just invest in biotech, allow them to cover it? But they, first of all, don't always do the basic research and fund it. Second of all, they don't always fund the students and the postdocs. And second of all, the postdocs and the students, we are the ones actually doing the research. We're not just getting trained to think about the ideas and then eventually we become PIs to do it. We are the ones that are executing it. So I just emphasize that by giving us funding, we don't have to waste our time searching for these other grants. Some other programs and PhD programs actually have to do that. They get half of their stipend covered and then they have to teach. At UCSF, I'm allowed to focus fully on what I do. And that's only possible through the NIH. So that's how I approached it, and I condensed all that into 3 sentences. So.
You did a great job. Thanks, Dan.
So, like Dan said, there are opportunities where we go up with groups to visit our legislators. So we want to talk to you a little bit, and I'm really bad about using the microphone. Got it. Sorry. Just about the concrete ways to advocate. So we'll kind of do a quick breeze through who are our San Francisco legislators, because most of the time I know that it's a hard time where everyone wants to call folks in different parts of the country who have different views than our San Francisco legislators, but it's really about focusing on who we have here. So we'll just do a quick breeze through of our fun elected officials. So in Washington, D.C.,
we have Senator Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris. We have Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. So you'll notice we don't have a lot of diversity in terms of political party if you're from San Francisco, live in San Francisco. So that can be frustrating sometimes, I know, because you feel like you're just, you call them, you write them a letter, you feel like you're preaching to the choir. Unfortunately, even if you have the instinct to, call the conservative, senator that lives in, I don't know, Texas or Arizona, unfortunately, the first question they're going to ask you is, what's your zip code? And once you, give them your true blue San Francisco zip code, they're going to say, okay, thanks, and they might listen to you, give your, your story that you've now crafted and are ready to tell, but they're not going to write it down and will not pass it on. So it's really, although it's hard to come to terms with this, it's really better to focus on our members and craft your story to make it interesting to them so that they can use it.
How about UCSF Fresno?
UCSF Fresno is great. We actually have been doing a lot of outreach to some of the Central Valley members that are represented, or whose constituents use UCSF Fresno.
Who's the representative?
So there's David Valadao, who is a Republican. He is from the surrounding area. Congressman Costa actually represents Fresno. He's a Democrat. But there are others. It's Valadeo and Costa that are the two that are. But so if you're looking for a Republican, Valadeo is a good one. Yeah.
But many employees and students live outside of the city and would have their own zip code, so they are other people.
Right.
You should repeat the question.
Right, so you stated that there are a lot of folks that work at UCSF or attend classes here or are students here that do live outside of San Francisco. For the purposes of this presentation, we recognize that, and we are happy to work with you to find out who your legislator is, where you live. For time purposes and just kind of ease of presentation, we focused on where the campuses are and what we're doing here.
But also, if you live within a hour and a half commute of the city, you're going to be in a Democratic district. We don't have, as Keith knows, we really don't have, there really aren't a lot of options. Yeah, India. Oh yeah, you need this. Sorry.
Just in case people don't know and you use Facebook, there's now a feature called Town Hall, and you can click on that and it will automatically populate all of your representatives and give you their phone number, contact, email, so you can, to make it easier for you to be able to contact them. And encourage your family that lives elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm not saying you shouldn't contact your members, you should. And our Democratic members need to hear from us just like our conservative, they need to hear our stories, they need to understand our stories because they're going to use those stories to fight against what's coming down the pike in terms of funding and other policies. So I don't want to say that you shouldn't call. I'm just saying I know there's the inclination to reach out to other members and they're not necessarily going to listen. They actually legally can't. There are rules against using the resources you have for your constituents from outside or for citizens from outside of your district. So it's just a note about what happens if you call another. Hold on, I know there was a question here. So
what about places you're from previously?
Yeah.
So what about places you're from previously? I mean,
If you give them your zip code.
Yeah. I would not discourage that. It's certainly something that I've done in the past.
Can you define constituents if we have lots of international researchers?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I just told you guys not to use jargon, and here I am.
And here we are using jargon. Define constituent was the question for those who are streaming in.
And a constituent is a person that lives in the elected official's district.
Or works. In San Francisco, if you're an employee at UCSF, they rely heavily on kind of what we do here, and so kind of talking to them about, I'm an employee at UCSF, and, here's what I do. Speaking on my own behalf, I am concerned about X, Y, or Z.
So I think the question was also about whether you are a citizen. I'm an immigrant. I'm a stealth immigrant. I'm a Canadian immigrant. So my question, I'm not permanent resident, not citizen, and so that's always been one of my questions is, what if you are not a citizen? How is that viewed potentially?
You're employed by UCSF. You're, engaged in the fabric of San Francisco. I mean, I think that listening to folks that are employed in your district is just as important as folks who are, citizens who live in your district. I mean, you are a constituent.
You don't have to be, I shouldn't have used the word citizen to begin with. You don't have to be a citizen to advocate about what's going on in the place where you live.
So, I can talk louder.
So a much more ambitious effort would be to think about taking students across the country and preparing them and sending them home to where their parents are, paying for it, and having them work locally in those areas, even if they're not living there anymore, their families are there, and trying to work with churches and also meet with the congressmen when they're home, which is obviously the best way to interact with them. Is there any thought about organizing a national effort of that type?
Well, no, I hadn't thought about that before, but that's a great, the idea of kind of reaching out to, that is an avenue to pursue. Reaching out, if you are interested in advocating in a place where it's not as blue as it is here, that's certainly.
So I'd like to hear from some of the students or postdocs who are from the Midwest or somewhere where we have a major problem. Whether how might that work, or could that work for some of you? That's really the question.
No one's from the Midwest.
I am, but I'm from Madison, so it's not too big of a, Madison, Wisconsin, so it's not too different from here. But I will say, I'm in the bioengineering program, and one of our faculty members over on the Berkeley side organized a quote-unquote master class for our students with an NPR science writer who organized this class to develop op-eds to be submitted for newspapers in our hometowns. So that's one idea, I guess, or example of how our program specifically was trying to encourage students to reach back to wherever we're from.
A great idea. And we're happy to assist with that kind of effort if
reach out to us. For op-eds, I had a group of physicians who wanted to talk about the ACA with folks in Sacramento. So we went to the state office building here in San Francisco to talk to Assemblymember Ting and Shu and Senator Wiener, and just talked about what is the trickle down from the impact of federal legislation to the state level and then the local level. And so we're happy to arrange meetings to help work with you. We're your resources. We're here to help share the voice.
I'm a little disappointed we've only talked about funding, but there are many other issues. Vaccination, climate change, you could do all of them at the same time. So I just wonder whether working with, say, a bunch of example graduate students and postdocs, you guys couldn't think of whether this would make sense. And you could raise money I'm sure you could, at this time, it's easy to raise money to send them back home for a week or so. So I just like you to encourage some exploration of that idea.
Well, Bruce, you've jumped the gun a little because we actually have a planned event coming up on May 3rd, so I'm going to show the details of that a little bit later. But we are having the executive director of the National Center for Science Education to talk about how you talk about settled science with people who don't want to believe it. So that's actually an upcoming event. So perhaps we can connect and talk about how to make that as effective as possible.
And another way to be, if you want to reach across the party lines, is to reach out to your colleagues at other institutions, people that you work with that might attend universities in red states or work in universities in red states, associations that you belong to. Reach out to them and see if they're planning advocacy events or days, or where they can pair you up with people who are going to visit some of the people that are more that are less stalwart supporters than our members here. So that's another avenue that we've been exploring. And it doesn't just have to be. I know not everyone here is going to make it to DC to advocate, and it doesn't have to. That doesn't have to be that. But those are some of the things we're thinking about.
In terms of avenues, I'm just wondering if you're also striking up partnerships with, say, Indivisible SF. They actually have, I forgot to tell you this, Claire, they have a reproductive health group, they have a climate change group. There are various ways that people from UCSF, in all capacities, not just researchers, can go to these other groups and inform their activities. And they already have a machine in place to do the outreach and the media work and to get your message out there. So there are other ways besides UCSF to hit the ground running on this.
Yeah, and trade organizations, any different kind of organization that you can kind of connect yourself into are great ways to kind of, cross, get outside of kind of the San Francisco, both state, local, and federal levels, and kind of connect into different organizations with their messages. Again, just being very careful to be speaking on behalf of yourself and not UCSF, but, plug into their machines and their advocacy efforts. Any other questions? Because we're kind of... So we will kind of end with we're your resources. These are our contact information. If you're ever in need of, have a question, if you want to go visit an elected official, please reach out to us. We are happy to help you. We're here as your support.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, one.
I guess kind of one more question. Kind of along the lines of not just focusing on funding, but just focusing on general, I guess, outreach to get people to be interested in science and to care about it. I mean, like Dan was talking about, kind of, we can see all these stories about, like, oh, we want to help people who have cancer and have these very sad stories, but there are also really exciting, wonderful stories to share. And, like, for example, my friend does a thing called Cycle for Science, where she's 3D printed, like, bikes that use solar cells that move and run across the country to try to show the importance of solar energy, but I haven't really seen quite as many things like that.
So the question for the folks in our streaming room, hopefully you can still hear us. It's okay. The question was about how a lot of times the advocacy looks like stories about how people are suffering from cancer or various diseases, but there's also so much exciting science that's happening, including apparently solar panel 3D printed bicycles. Did I get that right?
Yeah, well, the bicycles are just for, like, the excitement part.
Okay, the bicycles are for the excitement. The important thing is the solar panels. But what does it look like when you try to drum up science support by sharing stories of excitement?
And there are always great opportunities to meet with members and to kind of bring just a perspective. So there are different, like, advocacy days for the university kind of at large. So generally in a couple times a year we'll go up to Sacramento for UC Day or for UC Graduate Research Day. These are paralleled at the federal level, and these are opportunities for us to share positive stories about the amazing work that is being done, or opportunities to just send information on things. And our electeds love to come out and celebrate with us, as well as do the fight with us. And so it's always great to have good stories to share with them as well. So there are opportunities for that, and if there are very specific events to promote or to just make our elected officials aware of, we're happy to kind of help act as a conduit and transfer that information.
We love happy stories. Happy stories are good. Members love to hear it.
Yeah.
I know the the SEP partnership, which organizes science fairs and brings students to classrooms in San Francisco, mostly works locally, but I wonder if there's been any push to expand the reach into, like, the Central Valley or places that we'd have more of an impact.
And that I don't have the answer to. And is anyone, I don't know if anyone's here from there. Oh, here we go.
Sure, I'm Rebecca. I'm one of the co-directors of the Science and Health Education Partnership, or also known as SEP. And so we don't have plans really to expand to the Central Valley, largely because our volunteer base is here, and we try to be cognizant of the amount of time it takes for our volunteers to get to their locations. So we are currently doing work with San Francisco and surrounding teachers and schools, students, and then the Bay Area Science Festival is region-wide. And then beyond that, some of our work could be considered advocacy work, where we're doing some things with students, but using social media to spread information about current health and disease topics, including vaccination, Bruce. But our work is local because our volunteer force is local.
I just want to pick up on Bruce's point, because it was really an important one, that this is not just about NIH funding. There are a lot of really important issues to go after. For those of you who are itching for a fight, you don't have to be stuck with these the non-diverse representatives who we're stuck with in Congress who all agree with us. You can go out and work with and talk with congressmen. Also, there's no gender diversity in our representatives. It's terrible. Congress people are all on committees that are wrestling with some of these issues that we care intensely about. And many of them, because of the Republicans now are in power, are not in agreement with us on the directions these things should go. They need to be educated. They need to be talked with, and they're happy to talk with you. You are experts. Everybody in this room is an expert in an area that they don't know about and may well touch on some important decision that they have to make. And so Natalie and I in Washington spend a fair amount of our time in Republican offices, working with committee chairs and representatives or senators that are on these critical committees, and getting your voice added to that is something that is definitely possible. I chair an advocacy organization called the Coalition for Life Sciences that you can check out on the web, and that has a route for your involvement in getting into these matters that extend, of course, to Hill visit days, but are not limited to that. So there are various ways to be involved in some of these other issues. You could be speaking again as an individual who happens to work at UCSF, but I assure you that even though those who don't agree with you will be interested in getting your point of view. You may not persuade them, but it's important to have your voice represented.
Great, thank you. So with that, I'd like to invite, thank you very much, Laura and Natalie. You can't go away yet. So if you want to have a seat, I want to move into the next piece where we talk about what's going to happen on March 22nd, or sorry, April 22nd for the March for Science, which I constantly get backwards. So I'd love to also invite Claire Brindis and Kristen Rattan to come up and join us. Maybe we'll start with Claire. So Claire is a professor in pediatrics. I'm going to switch over so you can see exactly what she does. So Claire's professor of pediatrics and health policy, and she's the director of the Phillips R. Lee Institute for Health Policy Studies and the co-director of the Brixby Center for Global Reproductive Health Policy. So she has basically spent her entire professional life focused on ameliorating the impact of social, health, and economic disparities among ethnic and racial populations, with a particular focus on women, young adults, and adolescents and reproductive health. Her work essentially translates research findings into policy. So she has spent her entire professional life doing what we hope to do just a little bit of here. She's got a book. So Claire is going to talk to us about some of the things that are happening around UCSF to coincide with the April 22nd March for Science.
It's so exciting to see all of you here, and I think that this has been a very rich conversation, and I want to say a couple points that have been already emphasized, and then I'll share a little bit more about what we're planning as part of UCSF's response to the March for Science on April 22nd. So Keith has already given you a lovely example of social math. When he described the Starbucks, everybody can relate to Starbucks, and so I think that as you think about your message, we need to think very clearly about how do we translate the complexity of your science to something that people could understand. When we think about the former vice president of this country, Joe Biden, when he began his cancer moonshot, just think about how powerful moonshot is in terms of really thinking. He wasn't talking specifically to the public about big data. He spoke to us about big data. But the concept is that we can work together like we did to get a man on the moon in the same way to solve the problem of cancer. So the complexity in trying to solve it is really an important element. The second point that I want to make is that the current administration is trying to exhaust us. So we have to be very careful about the issues that you can work on given how very busy you are. You're running labs, you're running research. And so be passionate about what you do, but it's perfectly fine to do one small thing, whether you do that with others in professional associations or whether you do that through UCSF. But don't be harsh on yourself. Right now, I think the power of what we've been seeing across our country is the power of standing up and really being counted. And so perhaps this week, what can you do in 15 minutes? What can you do in 45 minutes? What can you do in an afternoon? And just finding that sweet spot for yourself is really important. But I like the concept of you being part of community, and I am really hoping that the event on April 22nd isn't just a one-time march, because that would be simplistic. We really have to be in this as a marathon, a very long marathon. And I think we also, third point for me, is how do we communicate effectively with a public that seems to be rejecting science? Clearly, the election taught us a lot about the bubbles that we are living under, and that there are a lot of people who misunderstand science. They might think that you're great, but they don't quite understand what you're doing, and there's sort of a effort now, I think, to discount the value of science by many individuals, not just the President of the United States. So we have a responsibility on our shoulders around how do you translate the value and importance of what you're doing in a manner that makes sense to people. In my work, I see people frustrated with science because we change constantly in the messages that we give. That is, we have to teach health literacy and science literacy about the fact that the science that we have today is the very best science under which we're making our decisions. But tomorrow there may be a brand new decision, a brand new finding that might discount what we've been telling you. And I think that disconnect between we're supposed to believe what you say, but tomorrow you're giving me a whole other message can be very complicated. So be thinking about what the needs are of our audience. How do we respond to that need in very concrete manners? Now, that's a little commercial, but I wanted to really tell you how pleased I am with our administration and how supportive Sam Hallgood and Dan Lowenstein have been, among many others on our campus, about having UCSF very visibly present. So on the morning of April 22nd, and there was a letter from Sam Hallgood, and many of you may have seen it already or not gotten to it in your inbox. But we're having a Stand Up for Science session between 8 and 10. 8 o'clock will be a breakfast, so it really begins around 8:30. It'll be live streamed. And what we have done with the committee that I've been directing, along with Liz and Patsy Babbitt and Sarah Knox and Andy Byman and Ruth Malone. These people are representing all of our schools because I think it's very important that the richness of our campus, the fact that we go from the very basic science all the way to policy translation around social disparities and other economic analysis, etc. That's what we represent as a community. If we just have one kind of scientist, I don't think that captures all that we are. So the panel will represent 6 individuals who themselves have encountered how their research and evidence has come to conflict with policymakers. And Mike McCune, who many of you know, will be the moderator. We will have Susan Fisher, who will share her experiences on stem cell research and efforts to continue funding from the federal government. People like Esteban Burchard, who's working very hard to raise awareness among policymakers regarding precision medicine and the importance of genetic testing and issues of ethnic and racial diversity. We will have Andre Campbell, who represents San Francisco General, who's a surgeon, and his big passion has to do with violence and trauma. And violence and trauma are topics that our federal government has not wanted to recognize for a long time, even before the current administration, in terms of sufficient research support and funding for it. Cherie Boyer, who's a psychologist, will share with you some of her experiences related to the Department of Defense work that she did to try to convince them to support funding for their military recruits related to support for reproductive health, HIV prevention. And then Jim Kahn, who's an epidemiologist, will speak about evidence and analysis to influence policies related to needle exchange and adult male circumcision and other HIV prevention spending. And Rebecca Smith-Beinman will speak about her research on the overuse of imaging and educating policymakers about establishing standards for radiology practice. And finally, Sunil Kolawat will speak about his efforts to raise awareness on bench research or basic research and its implications for disease and the importance of funding basic science. The issue about the panel, and I'll just say that one more comment related to that, is what we've tried to capture with our committee is the fact that you can influence policy in a variety of ways. And when Annette and I have been writing this book, and we sent out a flyer across the room, we need to recognize there's capital P policy type of research, policy being with a capital P, the work that goes on in Washington, D.C. or Sacramento or with your policymaker stakeholders. But there's also small p. Every day, people are making decisions about how science is going to be funded, whether it is a program manager or someone who's designated how they're going to operationalize the laws that were passed. So we have to recognize that other people, like for example, Rebecca Smith-Byman, is trying to influence other practitioners in the field to be sure that the kind of evidence that they use is effective, versus someone like Susan, who's trying to get more funding from the federal government for stem cell research. So that gives you a snapshot, and I know that there's other speakers, and I want to say that immediately after 10 o'clock, the campus is going to be doing a rally in front of Genentech stairs, which will be bringing many representatives from the bio-industry in the Valley to talk about their standing up for diversity and inclusion, about advancing diversity and inclusion around advancing scientific discovery. And we're partnering with the California Life Sciences Association and also with Gladstone Institutes. After that rally, then individuals can go downtown to be part of the larger March for Science. What I have made a commitment, and I hope many of you will commit yourselves, is that following the march, that we should continue to do these kinds of series, and I want to applaud and affirm Liz and all the work that she's been doing, as well as many others. The individuals on this panel are only the tip of the iceberg. There are thousands of examples on our campus of people who have been bringing science to evidence and to try to advance our shared agenda and vision for improving the health of everyone. So those are brief notes.
Can you pull up? So I'm just going to briefly introduce you, Kristen. Kristen is the co-founder and executive director of the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation, a nonprofit with a mission to evolve knowledge, how knowledge is created, produced, and shared. Kristen has a 20-year history working to accelerate advances in science and research communication, which I know personally because I had the privilege of working with Kristen for 3 years at PLOS. And before that, she also worked at Highwire Press. I don't know how to pronounce Attipon, and Biosys. So Kristen is the lead organizer for the March for San Francisco, March for Science in San Francisco on April 22nd.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, if we could pull up the website, that would be good for some visuals. Okay, thanks for coming out. This is exciting to be here at UCSF. How many of you are planning to go to the March for Science? Woohoo! Excellent. I was going to stand up and say, who's heard of it? But then I saw these being handed out. Thanks. Who made these? Come on, you can raise your hand. Awesome. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you guys are organizing as a group to come, and we have lots of ways to support that kind of activity for people to march under a banner, or march as a contingent. Okay, so the March for Science is on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. And I don't know about you, but ever since November 8th, I've just been feeling more and more frustrated. Other people have discussed that. And it wasn't until I started getting involved in organizing this march that I just felt better, physically, emotionally. It's wonderful to feel like you're doing something. And it's wonderful to feel like you're standing up for something specific and taking global action. So what's exciting about the march is it's happening globally. And numbers do count. So everyone who shows up to the March for Science is sending a really clear message that we believe in science communication, we believe in adequate funding for science, we believe in evidence-based policy, so we believe in literacy, meaning that the public understand science, And we believe in diversity in science. We believe in opportunities for many people to be involved in science, but also for them to access scientific information. So we have really specific things, and that list that I just read out is on the website, and here. And this is a San Francisco list. The March for Science in DC has a similar list, but we really felt that we could take a slightly firmer stand here in San Francisco, particularly around diversity. So the event itself, we've actually now finally gotten our route worked out. One of the things that has been a challenge for us is we are a volunteer organization, grassroots. We are nonpartisan. We've had to work really hard to ensure that our messaging is clearly nonpartisan, and so it took us a while finally to get all of our logistics worked out. And luckily, your friends here have actually printed out for you where we start, what time we start, and where we march to. But I want to just take a second before I go into some more details about the march to talk about that nonpartisan piece and scientists getting involved in politics. March for Science, by the way, is not just scientists marching, it's people who care about science, and that could be everyone. We plan to have lots of kids there. We plan to have a lot of families come. There are a lot of science advocates, science writers, people who just care, people who like to go to science museums like the Cal Academy of Sciences that's endorsed the march. So we expect actually quite a few numbers, and every day something's coming out in the news that we think is going to bump those numbers up. But it's 3 weeks away. Crazy things can happen between now and then. But we're nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean being non-political. And I think it's actually really important to understand the difference between partisanship and being political. You can be active in stating opinions about specific policies, bills that are on the chopping block, bills that are being produced or laws that are on the chopping block, funding proposals, budgets, without being partisan. And these are things that affect everyone in the nation, and just because one party is in power and the other one is not as much in power doesn't mean that if you're objecting to something, you're being partisan. Being partisan would be saying, I'm going to object to anything that party does, or I'm only going to support everything that this party does. I don't think anyone in this room would just sort of globally accept everything that a party had to say. You are all scientists. You rely on data. You make individual decisions every day based on evidence. So understanding that by standing up and marching from the March for Science, you are marching for principles that are global, that affect Democrats, that affect Republicans. The funding that's being proposed right now by the Trump administration, the budget cuts, affect everyone in this country and frankly everyone on the planet. So I think it's really important to make that case. And in fact, if our messaging can get out there to people who have questions about climate change, who aren't sure if they should believe it, who don't understand the debate around GMOs, this is good. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach. So I think it's really important to actually talk to people who say, well, I'm not going to march for science because I'm not a scientist, or I'm not going to march for science because I'm not political, to challenge those questions. So just to talk a little bit more about the details of it, we just recently announced the rally speakers, and the lineup includes, I don't know if you can read these up there, Popular Science, Adam Savage from Mythbusters, DJ Patel, your own Kishore Hari, who's here at UCSF, and a number of bench scientists, as well as an ALS patient who launched a nonprofit. And what I think is interesting is to know who's not on this list. So we approached people, and folks approached us about speaking, and ultimately people who felt they couldn't speak are people who are on any sort of a visa, people who hold a green card, people who work at a government agency, or work at an agency that's almost fully funded by the government. And I think it's really telling that sort of fear is so pervasive at this moment. We have a wonderful set of organizations endorsing us, as well as sponsoring. We have a large list of community partners. But again, the folks that aren't on that list are public institutions or publicly funded. And so there's this pervasive fear about what is really a very straightforward, nonpartisan statement about science and the importance of all of us understand that science be publicly available, that it is a public good. And yet there is this fear. So I feel it's really important in a moment of fear to show courage. And so I'm thrilled that all of you are coming to the march because it takes courage. It takes courage to stand up, to join the rest of the city, that's joining the rest of the country, that's joining the whole globe, over 400 satellite marches around the globe, to make these statements. So thank you for that. I'm ready to take questions or questions for the panel, if anybody has any. But let's march.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And actually, I wanted to take a second to call on Natalie to talk a little bit about what she plans to do with folks who do with you. What she's going to do with you. What events are offered in DC. They're going to organize any of the scientists at UCSF who are planning to go to DC for the March for Science. Please get in touch with Natalie because we've got some coordinated efforts going on there, and she'll tell you about that.
That's right. I know that, actually, can I see a show of hands of who's planning to be in DC? Oh, that's great. Wonderful.
For those in the streaming room, that's like 20 people here.
Yeah, that's great. So very exciting to know that there will be such a large contingent at the march. And on Monday, I do the same thing as you. I was going to say March. On Monday, April 24th, we're going to try to capitalize on all of your energy and enthusiasm, and we're going to have a UCSF Advocacy Day in DC. So we'll be so get your story together, and we'll be going around to the California delegation and some others. We'll try to get in with some of Keith's Republican friends while we're at it, telling our stories, talking about, and it's not just our, I know we've been talking a lot about research funding here, and that'll certainly, I assume that those of you in the group will want to talk about that, but there are other issues, immigration, healthcare, other issues that we will certainly be discussing as well with our California delegation and others. So very excited to have all of you there, and please email me. I think my email address is up there. If you're going to be there, we're having a meeting on Wednesday. If you email me before Wednesday, I can give you the details. We're having a meeting with those of you who are planning to be there, just so we can start organizing around your interest areas, and just, we can't have 30 people going into most offices together. So I'm just trying to be a little bit strategic about what people are interested in and who they want to talk to. So please contact me before Wednesday if possible, and if not before Wednesday, anytime up to, April 24th would be great.
So with that, if folks have any questions for any of our panelists up here about any of the events that are happening in San Francisco, both at UCSF and nationally, as well as at the March for Science, or any other questions that you might have?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to share something. I'm Julie Saba. I'm from Oakland, California. I'm from the other side. And numerous people here have been talking about the diversity of
numerous people here, fortunately, have been talking about the diverse face of American science, and I think that's one of the other aspects of the many things that we need to defend. And I actually created a poster that I shared with Natalie that is just has pictures of 30 people who've been in my lab, training in my lab, or working in collaboration with my lab, and they're from all over the world, including the 7 countries that were banned. And I had it done nicely, so I had a graphic designer help make it look nice. And it's on my Facebook page, so if you want to look up Julie Saba, or if you want to look it up by Facebook at the Face of American Science, you can share it with everyone you want online. And I'm going to be making posters for the march, so if you want some, let me know. Or probably you can contact Natalie or me.
Yeah, and let's talk. I just haven't had a chance to follow up with you on that, but it would be great if I could print them out and send them to the people who are going to be in DC.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
On the 22nd. So
Natalie said she can print some if you want.
Probably would be difficult, but if we can.
Hi. I just want to verify with Claire about what you were speaking about, the panels and the speakers. Is that the same day, April 22nd in the morning?
Yes, it's to warm you up for the march, meaning that we felt that while we were going to be visible or present at the bigger march, we thought, again, that we wanted to be visible on our campus with the sharing of these stories, war stories in some regards. But also it's a start for thinking about what do we do after the march. And I think that after the march we should also have some activities, which I'll turn to Liz to hope that she'll coordinate, because whether we work individually or through, the concept is to have that on our campus first before you go to the march.
With that in mind, actually, I have a question for Kristen, which is, what do you see as the outcomes for the March for Science in San Francisco and broader goals and next steps?
Great. The March for Science in San Francisco, our goal is for this to be an ongoing organization, and we're already planning post-March fundraising events and post-March activities. We want to do one on how science is part of food and drink, which would be fun. And we also are working with the DC group as well as other satellite groups to have the March for Science be an ongoing organization. And those are just in the earliest stages, those discussions, so there's not much to share. But everyone agrees that this is something that needs to continue, that the work will not be done. The March is a wonderful event. It's a wonderful expression of what we think is important. But it really is just the beginning. And, you know, as we've seen from the kinds of activities that are happening today, protests, people going to town halls, people making phone calls, it's working. Things are happening. Bills are not getting passed. You know, people are questioning whether they should just vote along party lines. I think it's really critical. So we see this as a beginning and look for a lot more activities moving forward. Did you want to add anything about DC?
I'm curious if anyone on the panel could speak more to how scientists can support policy. I know there are many other aspects that go into a policy decision. It's not just the facts or what have you. But if you could speak a little bit to how scientists who are interested in supporting policy with facts or data or anything like that, how does one go about reaching out or being available to individuals if they're interested in getting input?
Right, so we will frequently get questions from our elected officials of, you know, I'm working on a bill about X, Y, or Z. Do you have somebody that I can connect with? So, you know, it takes a while to get a bill written and to kind of move things forward. And so they do reach out to us. And so if there's I'm happy to talk to you offline, if there's a particular interest that you have or something that you're really working on that you think, I mean, you've got people you're partnering with, it's always kind of how do you connect in and how do we make those connections for you? And so we're happy to be that conduit. And
if you put the information that you want to talk about in your UCSF profile, in the narrative, that becomes a search engine. They can use that UCSF profiles to find people's expertise. So make sure that you, in the narrative that's your free text, put whatever it is that you want to talk about in there. It'll find it.
Which is a great piece of advice because
Great tip.
We will definitely like UCSF profile people, and when we get calls for, you know, oh, I'm working on a bill about this, and I've definitely found people that way and tried to connect them.
And Natalie and I are trying to build a bench of people who have interest in any range of topics that you have. If you could let us know, we really want to be able to know who we can call upon when we go to Washington with various issues that we want to discuss, when we go to visit particular members that have a particular focus that you can comment on. As I said, they regard everyone in this room as an expert. You don't have to worry about that part. They want to be able to talk with you. As I said, they may not agree with you, but in a way that's all the more important. So if you can let us know who you are and where your interests are. If it's general, it's fine. But if you have specific things that you have expertise in or really care passionately about and want to address, if you can let us know that would be great.
And I'd just like to add that I think it's important you as an expert can really be a knowledge broker. That is, someone who really understands the history of the problem that you've been working on and what the implications are for the kind of policy that you're trying to implement. So, for example, under the Affordable Care Act, unfortunately the vote on Friday was a huge win. There's been a lot of talk about risk pools for very ill patients. And there has been a long history of states trying to implement risk pools. But there doesn't seem to be a memory by the current administration about how much of a failure that has been. So part of what we would be doing as an institute is to bring together the knowledge, the research that perhaps you did not do yourself, but the field has done. Because you are a very smart ambassador for the field that you're representing. But you're also very smart about figuring out, okay, what would be the implications for the way a program should be developed or implemented or funded. So think about all the various talents in your deep bench that you'd bring to the issue.
I have just a comment. So today we talked a lot about how we can advocate for people who are outside of our institution, like our elected officials, for example. But I just want to bring up the question what we can do within our institution, to make the institution take stronger steps, in support of the values we have. Frankly, to support funding, to support science, to support the international community. I'm an international scholar myself, and I feel kind of a climate kind of changing in the U.S., right? And so if the regions are the bottleneck, if the regions have to take a stronger stance in order for us to take a stronger stance, and in order for UCSF and the UC system to take a stronger stance, I wonder what we can do to make that happen, because UC and UCSF are really powerful institutions, and I think I like these supportive messages, the emails we've been getting from the Chancellor, for example, but I would hope that the UC can do more.
Well, let me start by saying I totally agree with you personally.
Representing himself.
What?
You're representing yourself.
Let me start by just underscoring the importance of everyone speaking up as individuals as strongly, assertively, loudly, and frequently as possible. I think that's very important. Obviously, it's the First Amendment, and it's critical you do that. Your point, though, is well taken, and that is, wouldn't it be a useful thing to have an organization such as the University of California stand up and take these stances as well? And so far, the university has chosen not to take a stand, for example, on the March for Science. The Coalition for Life Sciences that I chair has done so, but the university has not. And it's possible that will change. And how to advocate for that. I mean, you're being here and you're making the statements you are is a statement of itself. And making those points clear to the Chancellor, to both Sam and Dan, is useful. They're our conduits to the Regents and to the President's office. And I think making as clear, as strong a statement as you wish to make in as organized a way as you can, or individual by individual, is fine. Whether it will have an impact, I don't know. I would love it if it did. But I think that this is the kind of grassroots voice that we need in situations like this. And so don't hesitate to make that point. It's possible that down the road, maybe hopefully not too far down the road, there will be a response. So
Thank you so much, Keith.
Don't hold back.
So we're getting very close to 5 o'clock, so I wanted to quickly share with you 3 upcoming events that we already have planned.